The courtroom, soaked in artificial light from rows of flickering fluorescents, felt more like a dissecting table than a hall of justice. Every detail inside, the polished wood panels, the tight-lipped jury, the judge with his expression carved in stone, conspired to strip away Avery Lane's identity, piece by piece, until all that remained was the accused. Her badge had been removed. Her name was now a number, and every eye in the room, from the press behind her to the bailiff by the door, looked at her as though the outcome had been written long before she'd even stood trial. It wasn't just the prosecution's case that felt premeditated. The entire proceeding moved with a precision that unsettled even the most hardened observers. Surveillance footage captured her car near Brandon Miller's apartment at the time of the murder. The weapon, a department-issued Glock, was found at the scene with her prints on it. One shaky witness, a man with sealed priors and a history of selling testimony, swore he saw Avery exiting the building the night Miller was shot. There was no cross-examination that could shake him. No forensic loophole left for her defense team to exploit. What they called evidence felt more like a performance, polished, convenient, and devastatingly airtight. Avery, sitting rigid in the defendant's chair, didn't speak a word when the verdict was announced. She didn't need to. The silence in her eyes said everything the court refused to hear. She hadn't killed Miller. She hadn't even been near that apartment. But logic didn't matter here. Someone had stacked the deck, and they'd done it well. From the gallery, Logan Barrett remained motionless. His posture gave nothing away. But deep beneath that calm surface, suspicion twisted like a vice in his chest. He had worked beside Avery for nearly 7 years, back when she was still a rising star in the homicide division. Sharp, relentless, and above all else, honest. She'd taken cases nobody else would touch, questioned supervisors others feared, and followed evidence wherever it led, even if it meant rattling the brass. That had earned her respect. It had also earned her enemies. So when the judge's voice echoed across the chamber, sentencing Avery Lane to death by lethal injection, Logan didn't just hear injustice. He heard warning bells. Something wasn't right. Then came the bark, sharp, piercing, alive with defiance. Every head turned as Rex, Avery's canine partner, struggled against the leash gripped tightly by a uniformed handler near the exit. The German shepherd's body strained forward, claws scraping frantically against the tile, his chest heaving in protest. His eyes never left Avery, not once, despite the officers now surrounding him, their efforts to subdue him growing more forceful by the second. He barked again, this time louder, a roar, as though trying to break the walls with sound alone. The judge gave a warning. The bailiff motioned for the dog to be removed. But Rex wasn't going quietly. He fought the leash with everything in him, his growls laced with something terrifyingly human: grief, confusion, refusal. It took 3 officers to finally drag him out of the courtroom, claws leaving long, desperate scratches on the floor. Avery turned just once, her eyes locking with Rex's for a final heartbeat. Her composure didn't crack, not visibly, but the way her fingers curled into her lap betrayed something deeper. A silent scream, a final goodbye the world would never hear. That moment stayed with Logan long after the courtroom emptied, long after Avery was taken into custody, long after the press declared her guilt as if it were fact written in stone. In the weeks that followed, Rex was transferred to the city's K-9 Reconditioning Center, a gray concrete facility on the edge of downtown. Officially, he was there for reassignment, maybe retraining, maybe retirement, depending on his behavior. But within days, it became clear something was wrong. The once obedient, highly disciplined, working dog no longer responded to basic commands. He refused food, ignored trainers, spent his days curled into the back of his kennel, his body turned toward the metal door, as if expecting someone to walk through it at any moment. At first, they chalked it up to trauma. Handlers whispered that Rex had bonded too deeply with Avery, that he didn't understand what had happened, that he couldn't cope with being separated. But Logan knew better. He'd seen grief in animals before, seen dogs mourn lost partners and fallen handlers. But this wasn't mourning. This was something else, something far more focused. When Logan walked into the facility for the first time since Avery's conviction, Rex didn't even lift his head. The trainers explained they had tried everything: new routines, favorite treats, even pairing him with a new handler. But the dog wouldn't move, wouldn't engage. Only when Logan knelt by the kennel door and said her name, Avery, did Rex stir. Not with rage, but with alertness. As though that word alone had meaning that nothing else did. Logan took him home that same day. The small cabin just outside Ashridge hadn't changed much since Logan left the force. A wooden porch creaked beneath his boots. The inside still smelled faintly of old leather, cheap whiskey, and burnt coffee. The kitchen doubled as a war room. Half-cleared takeout boxes scattered around reopened files, unsolved cases, and newspaper clippings. A second bedroom had become a filing archive, though Logan rarely slept in his own room anymore, preferring to stay near the chaos. Rex stepped inside hesitantly, his movements cautious, eyes scanning every corner. He didn't claim space, didn't wander. He simply walked to the center of the room, sat down, and stared at the front door. It was as if his body was there, but his mind, his purpose, remained wherever Avery had been taken. Logan crouched beside him, his voice quiet, barely above a whisper. "You remember her, don't you?" The sound of her name triggered something again. Rex whimpered low in his throat, stood up suddenly, and pressed his nose to the door, tail rigid, muscles tensed. He began scratching, softly at first, then with mounting urgency. That was all the confirmation Logan needed. The message hadn't been subtle, nor had it needed to be. It was meant to rattle him, and it succeeded. But fear wasn't what burned in Logan's veins now. It was anger, not just for himself, but for Rex, for Avery, for every innocent life twisted and manipulated by whatever machinery lay behind the masks and the shadowy corporate names. He stood in front of the window, arms crossed tight against his chest, watching the trees sway, knowing someone had been out there just hours before. Rex, always alert, lay coiled near the door, eyes narrowed, body stiff. The dog hadn't relaxed since the note appeared, and Logan could see the tension etched into every line of his frame. Whatever bond existed between them had deepened into something elemental, a shared understanding of danger without words. When Rex's ears perked and his body rose with that barely audible growl, Logan already had the Glock in his hand before a knock came. It was just one knock, hard, flat, measured. Logan opened the door slowly, gun angled at his side, but ready. Grayson stood on the porch, rain slicking his coat, a flash drive pinched between two fingers. Didn't trust sending this electronically, he said by way of greeting. "You're going to want to see this." Inside, they sat in silence while Logan plugged the drive into the laptop. The screen lit up with surveillance stills, timestamps, and metadata. Then came the video files, 3 of them, each one showing different individuals entering what looked like a private underground facility. Faces blurred by distortion filters, but their body language spoke volumes. Confidence, secrecy, familiarity with the place. One of them, tall with a distinct limp, wore a patch over one eye. "I ran facial geometry scans," Grayson said, pulling out a tablet. "That guy, he's Michael Harrington, formerly a senior inspector at the Metro Police. Disappeared off the grid 6 months ago. Official story, he said, early retirement." Logan didn't respond. His jaw tensed as the next video played. "Now watch this one," Grayson continued. A new feed flickered into view, an external angle of the same building. A car pulled up. The man who stepped out wore a suit that didn't match the surrounding decay. Trim beard, cold posture. Logan leaned closer. "That's Richard Vaughn," Grayson confirmed. "Assistant district attorney. Still active. Still powerful. But here he is, walking into a Black Widow front company, 2 weeks after Avery's arrest." The pieces were beginning to assemble themselves in Logan's mind, jagged and dangerous. Vaughn had prosecuted Avery personally. That alone was cause for suspicion. But now there was proof, real proof, that he had direct links to the tech firm responsible for the biopolymer masks. Logan's hand hovered over the keyboard, pausing the video. "He's not just involved," Logan muttered. "He's coordinating it." Grayson nodded. "He's the bridge between law enforcement and the operation." "What about funding?" Grayson opened another file. Bank transfers. Shell accounts traced to offshore holdings in the Caymans. Vaughn and Harrington both receive quarterly consulting fees from a parent firm called Nefer Logistics. But that's just a shell for Black Widow. So they're not just framing cops, Logan said. They're using the justice system to protect assassins. Exactly. The room grew colder, despite the fireplace flickering in the corner. Logan stared at the paused video, his reflection distorted on the screen next to Vaughn's. They were fighting ghosts, men who hid behind agencies, laws, and lies. But they weren't untouchable anymore. This was proof, and it was time to make someone answer for it. "I'm going to DC," Logan said, voice steady. Grayson looked up, surprised. "To do what? Walk into the bureau and wave this around?" "No, I'm going to see someone I trust. Someone who still has a clearance and a spine." "You sure about that?" Logan stood and pulled his coat from the hook. "No, but I'm out of time. They're already circling." Grayson didn't argue. Instead, he reached for the duffel bag near the chair and handed it to Logan. "What's this?" "Counter-surveillance tools. Burners. A hardline scrambler. You're going to need to vanish before you move." Logan took the bag, nodded once, and turned toward Rex. The dog stood ready, as if he'd known this was coming. As Logan opened the door and the storm wind slammed into the cabin again, he whispered just loud enough to be heard, "This time they'll see us coming." And with that, he stepped into the storm. Night fell hard over Ash Ridge, cloaking the detention facility in a quiet stillness that belied the chaos about to unfold. Inside, the air was thick with fluorescent haze, buzzing lights flickering faintly above the silent corridors. In cell block C, Avery Calloway sat against the cold concrete wall, her back straight, her mind sharpened by weeks of silence and reflection. The fabricated evidence, the mask, the silence of those she had once trusted, it had all played through her mind in endless loops. But tonight, she no longer replayed what had been done to her. Tonight, her focus was on what came next. Word had filtered through the prison's murky channels. Tonight would be the last transfer. The guards had whispered it outside her cell, not realizing she had learned to listen through walls, catch the shifts in tone. She could detect the code embedded in their words. She wasn't being moved to another facility. This wasn't about security or classification. It was an execution under the guise of administrative transfer. Unofficial, undocumented, final. In the darkness, the coded knock came. A subtle rhythm, 4 taps, then a pause, then 3 more. ADI, the signal she had been waiting for. Her contact, an undercover agent embedded inside the corrections department, slid a small pouch through the narrow food slot. Inside were wire cutters, a small vial of chloroform, and a key card she recognized from her days on the force. Avery waited until the lights dimmed for night cycle, then moved swiftly. She manipulated the internal panel of her cell's control unit using the key card and rewired the manual override. The lock disengaged with a soft click. She slipped into the corridor, quiet as a shadow, and navigated the passageways with the muscle memory of someone who had studied every layout, every blind spot, every patrol interval. But escape wasn't merely a matter of slipping through doors. Chaos had to follow. She triggered a fire alarm in the West Wing, sending red lights spinning and sirens wailing. Sprinklers erupted overhead. Guards scrambled in disarray, shouting over their radios, their routine shattered. Amidst the confusion, she moved toward the north service tunnel that led beyond the secondary gate. Outside, Logan waited. The moment he saw the emergency lights, he climbed from the undercarriage of a service truck, heart pounding. Rex stood beside him, ears alert, tail stiff, every muscle coiled like a spring. Logan had gambled everything on her finding the exit point. He didn't say a word as he scanned the outer fence, then saw a shadow break the line. Avery. She sprinted toward them, her hospital scrubs soaked through, hair slick against her cheek, eyes wild with the kind of clarity that only came from survival. But just as she neared the edge of freedom, headlights roared into view. A black SUV screeched into the clearing, agents spilling out, weapons raised. Logan pulled his firearm, but before he could fire, Avery dropped to her knees, hands raised. "Not now," she whispered. "They're not here to take me back." She was right. The men didn't read her rights. They didn't speak. They cuffed her and shoved her into the SUV, ignoring Logan's shouts. One of them looked at him with eyes devoid of emotion. "Stay out of it, detective." Then they vanished into the dark road, leaving only the wet churn of tires behind. But Logan knew where they were going. It wasn't the prison. He jumped into his truck with Rex and gave chase, trailing them through back roads and into the outskirts where city surveillance faded. He followed until he lost sight of the taillights at a decaying warehouse near the freight district, an area long abandoned, yet still used by those with something to hide. Inside, Avery was dragged through rusted corridors to a steel chamber lit by a single hanging bulb. Deputy Chief Walter Kessler waited in the shadows, sleeves rolled, eyes cold. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His presence confirmed what Logan had feared all along. This wasn't a rogue conspiracy. This was institutional. Meanwhile, back on the other side of town, Grayson's decrypted signal finally yielded something tangible. Using Rex's sent memory data, covertly tracked through Avery's discarded uniform, Grayson triangulated an irregular trail that led directly to the regional airport. Logan rerouted immediately. At the terminal, passengers bustled under artificial lights. Rex, nose low, led Logan through the crowd like a bloodhound with a singular purpose. At gate 42, a man in a dark coat stood alone, his ticket clenched in hand, face calm. Too calm. The facial features didn't match Captain Brent Holloway's known image, but the scent, Rex's unrelenting behavior, the subtle stiffness in the man's movements told another story. Suddenly, Rex lunged, teeth bared, pawing at the man's face. Security rushed forward, guns drawn, but Logan shouted above the fray, "Hold your fire! Get that mask off!" One officer stepped in, ripping away what appeared to be skin, revealing the unmistakable features of Captain Holloway beneath a translucent layer of biopolymer mesh. The terminal fell into stunned silence. Passengers gasped. Cameras flashed. Holloway didn't resist. He just smiled, a twisted, defeated thing. "They always send the dog," he muttered. But Logan wasn't listening. His thoughts were already rushing back, to the warehouse, to Avery, to the clock that was ticking faster with every second wasted.